This is an ABC News special report. Pope Francis in America. Now reporting, George Stephanopoulos.
Good morning again, everyone. We are back on the air right now with Pope Francis. He has just arrived at Ground Zero for an interfaith service at the 9/11 memorial. You see him there, flanked by cardinals. He just greeted an injured police officer. Cecilia Vega is there.
George, good morning to you. This appearance by the Holy Father has a very different feel than the others we've been covering this week. Obviously, a much more somber, a much more solemn feel to it. This site right here behind me, that's where the towers went down, George. As you said, Pope Francis has just arrived here. He will be meeting with family members of victims of 9/11. He will be meeting with first responders, and he will be right down there at that reflection pool. But if you can see behind me, I want to show you something here. This white building, that's the museum, the 9/11 museum now, and right on top of that, snipers. That shows you the fever pitch that security levels are out, not just at this area right now, but literally all around New York City as the Holy Father moves through. He's going to be speaking, meeting with family members, as I said. George will be following that from here today.
Father Jim also participating in an interfaith service as we see the Pope in prayer right there.
Yes, he'll be there with Rabbi and Imam. There'll be a selection of prayers from different religious traditions, and then the Pope will offer a reflection at Ground Zero.
Such an iconic place for so many Americans, those all around the world. And Matthew Dowd, that image of the Pope right there, so different from so many of the other images we've seen this week.
A much different picture right now than we've seen with the screaming crowds, the touching, obviously a very somber moment. And yesterday, especially looking at this today, I was struck by what he said at the start of his homily yesterday, talking about Islam and what had happened in Mecca with that awful tragedy, and reaching out to his Muslim brothers, and now he's here at the scene of 9/11. It's a striking thing.
Offering a flower at the memorial. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, by his side, the Archbishop of New York.
You know, it's important to keep in mind that this is sacred ground. There are people buried there who have never been identified. And this is not a tourist site. This is a very, very sacred place and a solemn place, and that is the way the Pope is treating it.
There he greets the former mayor, Michael Bloomberg. Cookie calls it a sacred place, Father Jim, and you know that well. You actually worked there down after 9/11.
I did. I ministered to the rescue workers starting at about September 13th for a few days, and Cookie's absolutely right. One of my predominant reactions was I'm standing before a mass grave. And so I think that the Pope understands that it must be a very emotional time for him too, having just come to the United States, coming to this most terrible place in our history, and also a place I like to remind people where people not only died, but rescue workers gave their lives, so a place of sacrifice as well.
Cecilia Vega, we see the Pope there with the former mayor. He's also meeting family members.
He is, George. A number of family members, in fact, the father of a New York firefighter who was killed here, a widow of a trade center worker among them, family members of people who were on that American Airlines flight, Flight 77, that crashed into the Pentagon. All of those people will be meeting with the Pope in prayer today, in thought and in reflection.
And that cross, the cross that emerged from the rubble, is very much a place where he is expected to be praying as well.
And you know, here he is as a pastor once again. We see him as a moral leader in Congress. We see him as an international leader at the UN. And here we see him as a pastor meeting grieving people, which is part of his role as a priest, and which he does, from what all my friends tell me, very well.
Every day balances all those roles.
Well, it's a very difficult balance to go from the personal to the public, to go from the pastoral to the world stage. I think this is where he feels most comfortable.
I do have to say, though, you mentioned that the difficult balance. The Pope has incredible stamina for a man almost 79 years old. As you watch him on this trip, the kind of emotional energy on top of the physical and intellectual energy it takes to go through a schedule like this over the course of 10 days.
Well, interestingly, I went to Vespers last night at St. Patrick's, and when he speaks, you know, from a prepared text, he seems sometimes dour and somber. When he meets people, he lights up. Another friend of mine was on a trip with him to Manila and was in a drenching rainstorm with him. And he said, well, the Pope's going to be just a mess the next day, having a cold. He said he woke up, the Pope looked fresh as a daisy.
Children especially, he seems to absolutely draw energy out of those children.
Well, and you know, one of the biographies I read said that to relax, when he was in Buenos Aires, he would spend time in the slums with the family. So this is, in fact, where he gets his energy in, to use one of his most famous words, encounter. He loves to encounter people, as Jesus did, one-on-one.
Yeah, it's struck me all week long that he consistently gets most of his energy from the people in struggle or suffering. And obviously this is a moment where there was tremendous suffering. It's a moment in America that changed our country. Part of what's the security that has followed him throughout this whole trip and is there was the result of what happened on 9/11. It changed our country forever.
He is now meeting board members of the 9/11 Memorial as well, which includes the families of many victims. I don't know if you know the answer to this, Father Jim, but we see these little gifts that the Pope hands out, a papal medal.
Papal medal, sometimes often rosaries if he's giving them to Catholics, and you can see his assistant will just give them to him. And they're blessed by the Holy Father, which is always treasured for the rest of people's lives.
Well, I'm wearing one now.
Of course, Koki, your mother served as the ambassador to the Vatican.
Right. But these are very special moments for these people. You know, I found myself yesterday when he was greeting the children here with an enormous smile on my face, sitting all by myself. And then I noticed that his young interpreter also just had a huge smile on his face as he was accompanied Pope Francis.
That interpreter, Monsignor Mark Miles, well, he's had a grueling schedule all week long as well. A young man from Gibraltar, always on the Pope's shoulder. The Pope is going to continue to greet the board members there and then go down into the memorial for a service. We're going to leave you now. Come back later this afternoon when the Pope goes to Central Park. 80,000 people expected. We'll see you then.
This has been a special report from ABC News.